Welcome to the Meditation Conversation, the podcast to support your spiritual revolution. I'm your host, Cara Goodwin, and oh my goodness, you guys, what a blessing it is to connect with the incredible Mark Anthony. We have a truly amazing discussion that you're going to just love. Mark is an incredibly gifted medium, and he's passionate about blending the scientific with the esoteric. Much of our discussion is about not only his fascinating stories from being a medium, but the scientific and even technological evidence that's quickly coming to the forefront to back up what he experiences biologically as a medium. And I even have my own psychic-ish experience relating to the solar plexus in this episode that left me fascinated. Mark Anthony, J.D., Psychic Explorer, also known as the Psychic Lawyer, is a fourth-generation psychic medium who communicates with spirits. He's an Oxford-educated attorney licensed to practice law in Florida, Washington, D.C., and before the United States Supreme Court. He recently won the Omi Award for Best Psychic Medium. Mark appears nationwide on TV and radio, including CBS TV's The Doctors, Gaia TV, and the Discovery Channel. He co-hosts the live stream show The Psychic and the Doc on the Transformation Network. This psychic explorer travels to mystical locations in remote corners of the world to examine ancient mysteries and supernatural phenomena. He's a featured speaker at conferences, expos, and universities, which include Brown, Columbia, Harvard, and Yale. Mark is the author of 3 best-selling books. His latest, The Afterlife Frequency, has won multiple awards, ranked as one of the top books about faith, and was up for a Pulitzer. His other best-selling books are Never Letting Go and Evidence of Eternity. He's also a VIP executive contributor for Best Holistic Life magazine. And you're going to get so much out of this episode, so we'll get started in just a moment. But first, check out caragoodwin.com, where you can get a free 10-minute meditation. If you want support for your meditation practice, I have a 21-day online program to help you develop your own practice. There's also the Healing Hearth membership, where you can get live assistance with your questions about meditation and life. And you can also get a personalized recorded meditation/energy transmission to help you get through whatever challenges are showing up in your life. All of that and more on caragoodwin.com. And now, enjoy this episode. All right. Well, welcome, Mark. I'm so excited that you're here. I've been waiting for months for this.
Thank you, Cara. It's an honor to be here, and I really appreciate you having me on your podcast.
Well, I have had the blessing to see you talk live and to read your book, The Afterlife Frequency, and I feel like I know your story pretty well. But in case there's anybody who is just learning about you and your amazing skills and your amazing background, can you talk a little bit about your background and what led you to explore the topic of the afterlife? Because it's very twisty and turny. It's not what you would expect.
Yeah, my story's a bit unusual, I guess, but then again, everybody is a unique person. Everybody has a unique story, which is part of them. I'm descended from a long line of psychics and mediums, and it appears to be a genetic trait, what's known as a recessive trait. In other words, being right-handed is a dominant recessive trait because 90% of the people in the world are right-handed. Being left-handed is a recessive trait because, it's determined genetically whether or not you're right-handed or left-handed. And with my family, both my parents, my mother and my father, had these abilities. And the 2 families could not possibly have been more different. My father's family, they were Baptists from Pennsylvania. They were Northern Baptists and very white Anglo-Saxon Protestant conservative. But my father had 4 siblings, and one of his sisters was also a medium, as was his mother Grace and his mother Isabel and his maternal grandmother Grace. So that ran in that family very heavily. My mother's side of the family came from Italy. They were Italian Catholics. My mother was a medium, and she was her maternal grandmother, Giovanna, also had these abilities. And Giovanna had come over from Italy, and she was known in the Italian community of New York City, Little Italy, and North New Jersey as the woman who knows things. and she was respected by a lot of the Catholic clergy. Even bishops, even a cardinal would come and consult with her and talk to her about spirituality. So my dad was a Navy SEAL, and he got out of the Navy, and here he is, this all, full of himself Navy SEAL, and he's at this USO dance, and he said, I spotted this foxy-looking dame. I remember him telling me this story. He met my mom, and he was like 20, I think he was 21 or 22, and she was 19. He thought she was like 30 because she was so well dressed and glamorous. Well, my mom worked for a high-end retailer in their design and advertising department. And so mom's told me, she goes, well, I got all the designer clothes wholesale. So she goes, I would wear, that. Anyway, they were both ballroom dancers, and they really hit it off. And so they met at a couple more dances. But my mom realized this was getting very intense. And she said to him, she goes, before we go any further, you need to realize I can see spirits. I talk to dead people. And my dad responded as only a sailor could, with all the colorful metaphors and adjectives, followed by, so do I. And then they realized that their connection was more than just, we're attracted to each other. There was this spiritual connection. Long story short, I have an older brother and older sister, and both of them have intuitive capabilities. But I was a surprise. They had me a bit later in life. And when I was around 3 years old, I was 3.5, and I was interacting with my invisible friends. And I remember my mother saying, oh, he's got it. And my dad going, oh, geez, he's got it. So from that age, I because it's not unusual for toddlers to have invisible friends, but when mommy and daddy can see them as well, they realized from that age that I had these abilities. And I remember when I started school, I was going to first grade, and I just turned 5 years old, and I was going to Catholic school. And my father said to me, do not tell anyone about these things. You can talk to mommy and daddy about them all you want, but people who see things others don't get taken away. I was so scared. And I remember I was shaking, and I remember my dad, and he was a tough guy, but he was such a good dad. He held me and he says, I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to protect you. I know I'm going on a bit of a tangent here, but there was a good reason why he said that to me. And I didn't know that until like 20 years later. His sister Marjorie, who I never met on this side, she was a very gifted medium. And about 20 years before I was born, she was married to this guy who was a religious fanatic, for lack of a better term. He did not like her ability to pick up on spirits. He didn't like her precognitive and anticipating future events. He thought it was Neville, the work of the devil and evil and all that nonsense. And one day he was going to work. He was a machinist who worked at a steel plant in Pennsylvania. And she had this horrible feeling, like she was getting it in her solar plexus, pit of the stomach, which is where we feel things. Begged him not to go to work. They had a big fight. Finally, he acquiesced. All right, fine, I'll stay home. Well, that day, a crane was lifting thousands of pounds of steel beams, and all of a sudden the cable snapped, and the beams crushed the machine shop that he worked in and killed everybody in it. Now, if he'd been there, there's well over a 90+% chance he would have been killed. And the thing is, Cara, you would think that he would be grateful that her spiritual abilities saved his life.
Saved him, yeah.
However, it intensified his fears, so he got an unscrupulous psychiatrist to diagnose her as a schizophrenic, having hallucinations. She was forcibly removed from her home in a straitjacket. They took her to a mental institution where she was subjected to electroshock therapy for a period of over 6 months. They did so much damage to Marjorie's brain that she never again talked about seeing spirits. And So that's why my father was so worried when I was a little boy, because we've been persecuted horribly over the centuries, burned at the stake for witchcraft and sorcery, in the medieval era. To this day, in a number of Middle Eastern countries, people with these abilities are beheaded. So here I am, a little kid, and my dad wasn't trying to scare me; he was trying to protect me.
Wow. Well, I have to say that when you started talking, was it Marjorie, did you say?
Marjorie, yeah,
Marjorie, you brought her up, and I noticed in my solar plexus this sensation, and
yeah.
to where I was like, why is my solar plexus? What is going on with that? Like, where is that coming from? And I'm like, just made a note of it, but I was really like trying in my own mind, like, why would my solar plexus be so active right now? And then you go and talk about that. So that was incredible.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because there's two major psychic receptor areas in our body. The pineal gland, which is the proverbial third eye chakra for our people, our Hindu and Buddhist friends, or our friends who do yoga. But we'll start with the solar plexus. The solar plexus is just below the rib cage, and it's in the area of the diaphragm, and it's the most complex bundle of nerves outside of the cerebral cortex in the body. And the reason it's called the solar plexus is because the ganglia, the nerves, radiate out from it like the rays of the sun, ergo solar plexus. And it has been considered by some neuroscientists to be the body's second brain, because it is, like I said, the most complex bundle of nerves outside of the cerebral cortex in the human body. And this is where it is theorized that psychics, I know it is, but I have to stick to science. It's theorized that we pick up on emotional, intuitive, precognitive. You hear my gut feeling. Well, where do you think that expression comes from? I feel it in the pit of my stomach. Well, that's because we pick up on emotional vibrations, warnings, dire consequences, things like that. And people tend to pick up on negative things because it's a lower, denser vibration that's easier to detect than the higher vibrations of positive energy. And so that's why when you were saying that, you were picking up on this. And let's face it, for all of you out there who are parents, you have this connection with your kids, whether you're quote unquote psychic or not. You pick these things up. Then about 4 inches behind the center of the forehead, in the brain, is a small gland, the pineal gland. Some people call it pineal. Anyway, it's pineal. The most mysterious, most misunderstood, most studied gland in the body. It's between the size of a grain of rice and a small lima bean, and recent studies have found calcite and magnetite crystals within the pineal gland. What was the first radio? A piece of quartz crystal with copper wire running low levels of electricity through it. And in our brain, we have this. The pineal gland controls our brain wave frequencies, our ability to perceive light, our circadian rhythms. It secretes the hormone melatonin, and that's just for starters. Incredibly sophisticated. And for people, when you're jet lagged, the reason you're jet lagged is because your pineal gland hasn't had time yet to align with your position on the earth with the earth's magnetic field. So everything's this electromagnetic, energetic connection. And the pineal gland is where we receive visual, auditory data. So the solar plexus is the feeling, the sensory perceptions. The pineal gland is where we get the facts, figures, and data, if you will. So we have two psychic receptors in our body. That's why people will feel that. And when people talk about visions, it's because that is being detected by the pineal gland.
Oh, that's so fascinating. I love that. Thank you. Also, as an aside, when you talk about your grandma, where in Italy did she come from?
Giovanna, she was my maternal great grandmother. And
Great
what's
grandmother.
really cool, back in 2016, PBS did a special called The Italian Americans. It was a 2-night special, 2 hours each. They actually did an entire segment on Giovanna, and they even
No
referenced,
way.
yeah, they referenced her psychic abilities, which I thought was really cool. I
Wow,
remember
that's
watching on TV, and like,
amazing.
phone kept ringing. It was my cousins and my siblings. Everyone's texting. Did you see that? Um, Italy, it looks like a boot, and if you go to the tip of the toe of the boot, on the closest spot between Italy and Sicily, is the town of Sheila, Schilla, and that is where my family came from, was Sheila.
Oh, okay. I spent 4 years in Bologna. We just moved back. We moved back 6 years ago. And anytime my ears always perk up where I'm like, I wonder where. Um, but I was thinking it was south. I can't remember if you talk about her in the afterlife frequency or not. Maybe I
I,
already knew that.
I, in my first book, Never Letting Go, and in my second book, Evidence of Eternity, I go more into Giovanna in the background. With each of my books, I try not to just reiterate what I've already written. I mean, there's going to be some
Hmm.
overlap, because people need to understand the scientific concepts. But I didn't want, I mean, because I read a lot of books by other mediums, and with all due respect to them, they're basically saying the same thing over and over. And I try to make sure, like my first book, Never Letting Go, is I wrote it because it's a guide on the journey through grief. It helps people when you're in that fog and it's like you don't know, and you're searching for something, and it teaches you about how our relationship with someone we love has gone from one of a physical nature to one of a spiritual nature. Evidence of Eternity, when I was on the Never Letting Go tour, people kept asking me questions. Does God exist? Does hell exist? What happens when you die from suicide? Do animals have souls? They kept asking me all these cool, very cool questions, and I started keeping a track of those questions, and that became the genesis, if you will, for Evidence of Eternity. And in Evidence of Eternity, I found a lot of people wanted, is there any science to back this up? And the scientific explanations were so well received that that led me to work even more in understanding the quantum physics behind spirituality, spirit communication, and that's what led me to write The Afterlife Frequency. Because, Cara, I believe that there is an explanation for everything, even the mysterious, the unknown, even the spiritual. And ultimately, it's going to be based on science and on quantum physics. Because we don't understand something now, or we do not or have not yet developed the technology to detect it or quantify it, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And that's why I think living in the 21st century, at least from that standpoint, is very exciting, because we are making these advances, and our understanding of the afterlife and survival of consciousness has expanded so much. I think this is great.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I loved so much about the afterlife frequency is that merging, like a weaving of your incredible gifts that, you know, that you're experiencing, but it's hard for other people to experience at the same time. But then you're taking the science and explaining how frequency plays into it and how the physiology, the biology, all of that. And, it's worth mentioning that you are a lawyer by training. So
Yeah.
you've got this highly intelligent aspect of your being, and you're bringing very practical kind of everyday language so that it's really easy and accessible. That's the right word for it, is accessible. Um, but do you want to talk a little bit about how you do see science and spirituality kind of
Oh,
weaving
certainly,
together?
certainly. And I spent years in the courtroom. I've tried over 100 jury trials, and I don't even know how many bench trials. Bench trials mean trials without a jury. hearings and bench trials. And um, I had a friend, and he was hilarious because when he was talking to a jury, and I'm just mimicking him here. It was he all but said this. I realize you're a group of morons, so I'll make this as simple as possible. And even had this voice that kind of sounded like this. And I remember a couple of my friends, we were having lunch with him, and he go, you know, you've got to stop insulting the jury's intelligence because these people are not stupid. They're just not schooled in legalese and the legal terminology. Yeah, because it'd be like a vehicle was proceeding through the intersection in a northwesterly vector when it collided with. How about Joe Smith was going to work when he was slammed into by a bus driven by Mac Jones, who was not paying attention, and his life was changed forever. And so I learned that you have to take these complex concepts and put them in a form that number one, people can understand, and number two, that they want to be able to hear. I suffered through enough boring books in law school that I don't want to inflict that on anybody. I mean, I could barely stand reading this stuff. I read some of the technical, not some, I read a lot of the technical papers and journals about afterlife science. And it's like, okay, guys, you're brilliant scientists, but I have the equivalent of a PhD, and I'm bored, even though this is what fascinates me. And so I take a lot of time to number one, understand that, and then convert it into a way people want to hear it. And I was working on something for the afterlife frequency. It was on quantum physics one day, and I just couldn't grasp it. And I was ready to start pulling my hair out. And then this quote comes up from Werner Heisenberg, and he's one of the founding fathers of quantum physics. And he said, when you think you understand quantum physics, you really don't. And I burst into laughter. And it was like one of those signs from, synchronistic signs. It's like, okay, if Werner Heisenberg was having a difficult time with this stuff, I'm feeling a lot better about myself now.
Oh, completely. Well, you do have, because when I saw you live in speaking in the Ascension retreat in Sedona, you were really bringing together a lot of that quantum science and equating it to these people who were here to talk about spirituality. And it was really fascinating. And you talk about things in terms of frequency match and how that kind of creates our experience, and your experience as a medium and how frequency plays into it. Can you explain a little bit
Certainly.
about the role of frequency?
Absolutely. We know from quantum physics that everything's made of molecules, which in turn are made of atoms, which in turn are composed of electrons, protons, and neutrons, which in turn are comprised of the smallest particle, which is known as a quantum. And that's where the term quantum physics comes from. A quantum is pure electromagnetic energy. For our listeners, our audience who are adept in physics, technically an electron is a quantum because it's 1/1800th the size of a proton. All right, so there we got our physics people squared away. Now, what this means, Cara, is that everything on the subatomic level is composed of the same electromagnetic energy. That means you and me, this pack of Post-its, okay, the microphones we're speaking into, the radio waves that this show is being broadcast on, the rings of Saturn and beyond, are at the subatomic level, all composed of the same particle of electromagnetic energy known as a quantum. And people tell me, well, that's really hard to wrap my head around. You think? I mean, this took Albert Einstein, Max Planck, Werner Heisenberg, Niels Bohr, Louis de Broglie. I mean, it took the greatest geniuses this planet has ever produced to figure this out. So if you have a hard time wrapping your head around it, no problem. Okay, that's okay. But the thing is, everything vibrates on the subatomic level. They just vibrate at different frequencies, which is why you and I are alive and this pack of Post-its isn't, because that's vibrating at a different frequency we are. Okay, so now we have that. We know that energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. That's from the laws of thermodynamics and physics. We know from the field of neuroscience that the human brain is only 2% of the body's weight, but it consumes over 20% of the body's electromagnetic energy. Okay. Neuroscientists say that our consciousness, okay, the who and what we are, is the result of chemical reactions and electrical impulses within the brain, yet they're completely unable to explain why. And that is because the soul, the who and what we are, pre-exists the body, comes into the body, moves on after the body dies. Just like every great spiritual teacher from the sages of ancient India through Zoroaster, Moses, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, Confucius, Lao Tzu, Gandhi, Yogananda, Paramahansa, the spiritualism of Native America, the religions of the Pacific, all say the same thing, that the who and what we are, soul, spirit, consciousness, pre-exists the body, comes into the body, moves on after the body dies. So after years of research, I also found that the brain has 5 main frequencies: gamma, beta, alpha, theta, and delta. Gamma is when your brain's really cranking at full speed. Okay, that's when you're doing a calculus exam or you're on Final Jeopardy. Theta, those are the activities of daily living, like the state we're in now. Alpha, I call alpha the groovy baby state, because that's when you start relaxing, you meditate. And alpha can then lead to theta, which is deep dreaming sleep, very restful sleep. And then there's delta, which is extremely deep sleep where not much is happening brainwave frequency wise, because your energy in your body's been diverted to healing, growing, and working on, the mechanical repairs within our body. Sometimes I wish it would do a little bit more. But each of these brainwave frequencies can be measured through QEEG and an EEG, quantitative electroencephalogram, and an electroencephalogram, EEG. And it is around 8 hertz, which is the border between alpha and theta, where psychic and mediumistic activity occurs. So what happens is that spirits are able to see this, and they adjust their frequency down to that 8 hertz. That's why a lot of spirit contact, and I bet a lot of people who are watching this program right now have had, in the sleep state, you have a dream where you talk to a deceased loved one and it feels real. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you come out of it going, wow, I really just talked to my mom. And that's because you did. And the interesting thing is, we, meaning people who study mediumship, we're not sure why or how, but people like me can go from the beta to alpha theta voluntarily within seconds. Normally it takes time to get into the dream state. So all of this is frequency. So based on a lifetime of study of both theology, quantum physics, anatomy, and neuroscience, I developed the term the electromagnetic soul to describe what we really are, which is a soul that is pure consciousness, also known as a spirit, that is eternal electromagnetic energy. So think of it like this. When you die, okay, your EMS, your electromagnetic soul, is like a drop of water. It leaves your brain and then it plunges into this eternal sea of souls that I call the collective consciousness. And the great Edgar Cayce, one of the most renowned psychics of all time, who passed back in the 1940s, referred to this as the universal mind. You may look at it in Christianity as the Christ consciousness. In Buddhism, they call it, consciousness, the eternal stream of consciousness. And this has been a phenomenon that's been observed and described for thousands of years. but I do believe that it is explainable through my EMS, electromagnetic soul theory. So I hope that basically answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you so much. And one of the things that I love so much about that is the explanation of how that works with our human chemical biological makeup. You also have a very fascinating story of presenting at a conference, I believe it was, and your best friend who had been deceased came through beyond the mediumship
Yes.
capabilities. And this, because it was captured with human-made technology and by an atheist.
Yes.
It's just, I feel like that is such a great segue from what you're saying to, because it's with the electromagnetic soul, that we all have that. But the fact that this was picked up on by a human-made technology, would you care to share that
Sure.
story?
Certainly. My best friend, I write about him in both Evidence of Eternity and in the Afterlife Frequency, Billy. We met when we were 11. Okay, we met and then we went through junior high, high school, went to college together. And then after college, I went to law school and he went to Asia. Um, he was a linguistics genius and he was teaching Japanese executives in Tokyo conversational English. All right. And I remember he said, Mark, he goes, I'm only going to be here for a few years. You got to come over. And so I took a month off and I remember really ticked off all my law partners. But you know what? Um, Sometimes you got to do what you got to do in life. And I took the time off and we spent a month together going through Japan and then Southeast Asia. And we'd go to these Buddhist temples and I was always talking to the Buddhist monks and, I always enjoyed, hearing what they had to say. And from the time we were in high school, we had always had a debate. And even though we'd both been raised Catholic, he was an Irish Catholic, I was an Italian Catholic. He didn't believe in God. He was an atheist. He didn't like all the, the doctrine, the dogma. But he'd always say to me, I don't get how you do the psychic thing. I just don't understand that. And he said, you give me these, he said, it makes me think. I said, well, why don't you believe? He goes, well, there's no technology. There's no technology that can prove this. And I said, well, you got to give it time. Well, I remember one of the best days of my life. He and his fiance asked me to perform their wedding ceremony. It was here in Florida, and I was a notary public, so I had the authority to marry people. And it was at this beautiful hotel, and it was outside on this deck overlooking the ocean. And he met her in Japan. She was this beautiful, beautiful Asian woman, still is. We keep in touch. And that was everybody that I loved was there that day. My best friend and my soon-to-be new best friend, his wife, my parents, his parents, all of our friends and their parents. I mean, my fraternity brothers, my high school buddies. I mean, it was incredible. And in some way I kind of knew it's like it doesn't really get better than this. And a couple years after that, things were not going well for Billy, and I'm going to respect his privacy, but he died by suicide. And naturally, I was absolutely devastated. And about a year and a half, maybe two after that, my book, Never Letting Go, my first book had come out. And I was speaking at the Stanley Hotel at Estes Park, Colorado, at a paranormal conference, and I had just spoken, and then I was in the conference area, and I was signing books for Never Letting Go. And my manager, Rocky, and she travels with me, she was walking around looking at all the paranormal investigation equipment because they were displaying all these infrared scanners and EVP, electric voice phenomenon, this thing known as the spirit box. And Rocky was walking by this guy named Chris who was displaying the spirit box, and all of a sudden she hears, "Get Mark." She stops, and Chris goes, "Did that just say?" And then it said it again, "Get Mark." And Chris goes, "Do you think he means you're Mark Anthony?" All of a sudden I hear, Mark, get over here now. And I look up and I'm like, what's going on? They're like, now. And I run over to where they're at. And as I get up to the table, all of a sudden I hear, dude. And I stop and I look at this thing. I look at Rocky and tears are streaming out of her eyes. And I hear, love you, bro. And I go, I know that voice. And Rocky knew Billy too. And she goes, Mark, we both said Billy's voice. And so the paranormal investigator, he's freaking out, going, man, this is really, really rare. He goes, number one, it called for Mark by name. And number two, both of you can objectively verify whose voice that is. And of course, I mean, I was very emotionally overcome. I remember how many times I tell this story, I get choked up. And then it dawned on me, the atheist who always questioned the afterlife, who said there was no technology to communicate with it or prove it, what did he select to get a message through to me but a piece of technology? And you know what's really, really cool, Cara, is the spirit box. It was developed by a gentleman, an electrical engineer, an absolute genius by the name of Gary Galka. And Gary and I are going to be, we've already filmed it, but we're going to be in an episode of an upcoming Discovery Channel show. It's going to be coming out later in 2024. And he invented the spirit box because his teenage daughter died, and he was so devastated. And he started working on this, and he could, pick up on her voice and start communicating. In fact, every paranormal investigator I know uses the spirit box. And so when we were on a break from filming, he said, Mark, you want to see how this works? And so he's tuning in, and all of a sudden we hear a female voice. He goes, oh my God. He goes, that's Mel. Her name was Melissa. That's my daughter. And then I heard a male voice, and I go, that's my dad. And then I heard my mom's voice, and then his daughter's voice came back, and then I got a message for him from his daughter. And when I delivered it to him, the tears started streaming. He goes, that has to be from her, because nobody would know that. And it was so cool because he was using the technology. I was using the biotechnology, which is my mediumship ability. And we were both getting messages. Like I heard from my parents and obviously his daughter, but I was able to objectively or through my ability verify that not only was it his daughter, but to deliver to him an extremely personal message, more than one. And that's why I find that we live in an era which is so exciting. The skeptics and cynics will say that this is merely pseudoscience and we're jumping to conclusions. And, but there was a man by the name of Nikola Tesla who developed some tremendous technology, including AC current. Okay, there's a lot of things that we use on a daily basis that were the result of Nikola Tesla's genius. And the term pseudoscience really may not have been around when he died almost a century ago. But he said that one day a man will be able to take a device from his breast pocket and not only hear, but see anyone anywhere on the planet. Hello? Cell phones.
Right.
And he was called like fake science, pseudoscience, a quack. And I look at him in some ways the way I look at Leonardo da Vinci. He was sketching designs for something that we now call a helicopter 500 years before we had the technology to build a helicopter. So just because the technology has not currently been invented, or it's still in its early and developing stages doesn't mean we're not going to be able to develop something. And I do know that Dr. Gary Schwartz, who's head of the Soul Phone Project, is currently working on technology to do just that, to actually tune into the other side. And I'm on the board of directors of the Soul Phone Project. And Gary's a beloved friend and colleague, and his wife Rhonda is a medium as well. And it is such an honor to work with these geniuses that are developing technology, which hopefully will once and for all answer the question that there is more beyond physical death. I mean, there's a whole other existence beyond that, and that we can communicate with it.
Right. Oh, that's so fascinating. I didn't know about the soul phone. That'll be great. I love it.
Yeah, it's cool. I've been in the lab. I can't talk about it because I had to sign an NDA, a non-disclosure
R-
agreement, but
right.
it's cool. I'll just tell
Yeah.
you that. I've seen some stuff like, whoa. Yeah.
Wow. Well, and it makes me think too about in the afterlife frequency, you talk about the role because you mentioned about skeptics. And I don't believe that you're really on a mission to necessarily change people's mind who aren't interested in going there. But of course, in your line of work, you're going to get people who maybe they're curious, but they're, not fully on board. In the afterlife frequency, you talk about the importance of openness, and
Yeah.
there is a pattern that some people have where they just get in a no, and everything that comes forth in a reading, for example, is like, nope, nope, that doesn't make sense. Nope, nope, nope. And the effect that that has on you as a medium and the effect it
Yeah.
has on the reading itself. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the importance of staying open.
Um, First off, I'll talk about it in the context of a skeptic versus a cynic. People go, I'm skeptical. I don't believe that. Well, that's not skepticism. That's cynicism. Okay. You're cynical. You're negative. And, you're closed-minded. Your brain's like that.
Mm.
A skeptic will say, well, I don't believe it, but I'm open to proof. Therein lies the difference. And healthy skepticism, I mean, I go around saying, I talk to dead people. Well, that's great and all. And the problem with mediumship, the history of mediumship, is that it's been fraught with fraud. There have been fraudulent mediums. I've seen some demonstrations by people who claim to be physical mediums who say they're, manifesting things, and they do these ridiculous voices and stuff. And I can tell you that it's fraud. But for those of us who are legitimate and that's why I practice evidential mediumship, because as a lawyer, I know the importance of evidence. You can't substantiate or prove a case without evidence. And as a medium, I mean, anyone could give you the four assumed dialogues. Cara, your grandmother's here. She loves you. She brings you joy. She wants you to feel upliftment. Ooh, how deep is that? I mean, everybody's grandmother probably loves them, wants them to feel joy and upliftment. But when you start transmitting pieces of information that nobody could know, okay? I was doing a reading yesterday for a woman, and her mother spirit came through and started talking about Louisiana. And she goes, okay. And something about her son, one of her sons. And then I saw, and I described it in my mind's eye, I saw a sign that said no swimming with a picture of a huge alligator coming out of the water. And the woman says, oh, dear God. And I said, what? She goes, last week, my husband took my son to New Orleans and they went on a bayou trip and they were in his boat. And my son stuck his hand out over the water, and all of a sudden, out of the water, this alligator came and almost bit his arm.
Oh my God.
Now,
How many people does that happen to?
exactly.
Very few.
And thank God it didn't. Okay. And
Right.
also, people, when you're in bayous and swamps in the South, please don't be sticking your hands, especially see in these waters, the water's very black because of the tannic acid. Well, don't think alligators can't see through that stuff. All right.
Yeah.
And other things that are living there. Now, this was an indication that her mother spirit, this boy's grandmother, was around him and aware of what was happening in his life. And so she was able to verify that. Because, people say, oh, that's a coincidence. Really? So in every reading, I fling out Louisiana and a sign that says no swimming with a picture of an alligator on it. Really?
Right.
Then something else happened about 2 weeks ago. This one cracks me up. I was doing a reading for this woman, and this female spirit came through. She couldn't identify her. I was giving her the identification. And I said, she keeps talking about ants, A-N-T-S, ants, ants, ants. She goes, I'm not sure. And in my book, I talk about the no, no, no syndrome. When you keep saying no, you keep creating a negative energy barrier, and spirits will back off. So it's better to say, I'm not sure, let me think about it. And she was good. She says, well, I'm not sure, let me think about it. Just jot it down in your notes. She contacted me about a week later, and she said, she wrote about the ants, and she said when she was in college, her best friend in college went to France, and when she came back, she said, my friend returned from France with a souvenir from me, and she was so excited to give it to me. It was chocolate-covered ants. And she said, and I was mortified, and it turned out to be like a big thing. Hey, give me a chance. And she said, and I didn't know this last week, but I found out she had died recently. Whoa. So what was happening? Her friend was coming through and brought up the ants, which was this huge thing between the two of them.
And she didn't even know she'd passed away, so
She
she wouldn't think of her.
Precisely. So when people go into a reading and go, no, 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 you don't do that. It's better to say, I'm not sure. Let me think about it. I don't know just yet, because the no, no, no creates a barrier. Um, one more funny one. So I was on a TV show, and when I'm on TV, I have to do readings live. All these other mediums, they record them ahead of time and edit it down to 30 seconds and all this. But this woman's there, and I'm drawn to her, and she stands up, and her husband's sitting next to her. He's all bottled up and, got his hands crossed. Could tell that she must have dragged him there. And the host of the show, is like, do readings. And I said, I'm getting a younger male who died, feels like he could be like a son. She goes, well, my son died. And I was giving a piece of evidence. And I said, now I'm getting cross. I'm seeing a cross. I'm hearing the word cross. And she's staring at me, shaking her head. No. I go, this is really strong, cross. I go, did he work for the Red Cross? I just seen him cross. No. Well, on most TV talk shows, it's 7-minute segments followed by 4 minutes of commercials and a 7-minute segment. And we're at the end of a segment. So those said, all right, we're going to a break, and then we'll come back with more with Mark Anthony. So we're on the 4 minutes while they're playing the commercials, and this lady's standing there staring at me, and her husband says, well, our last name is Cross. And I said, you mean like your son's last name too? And they both look at each other and go, yeah, our son's last name was Cross too. And the host of the show, and she put her head in her hands. I heard her going, oh God. So we come back on air, and the host goes, so on the break, Mark, before the break, Mark was saying Cross, and they weren't sure. And then they realized on the commercial break that their last name is Cross, just like their son. She goes, Mark, why don't you go to somebody else?
Oh, the pressure, I guess.
Well,
TV.
I'm used to being on stage. I've been on court hundreds, 1,000 times, at least. And I've been on TV a lot, and it's still nerve-wracking. You learn how to control your nerves and get into your groove. And these people, in their defense, had probably never been in front of television cameras before, and there they are in a live audience, TV cameras, at least 1 million people watching, and they're also dealing with the fact that their son had died. So in their defense, she was just terrified. But it can be very difficult for mediums when you get people, no, and then it makes sense to them later. One last story, then we'll go on. This happened I think about 2 weeks ago. I was doing a session for a woman, and her grandfather came through, and I'm seeing Disneyland in California. It's Disneyland, California, getting Anaheim, Disneyland, California. No. Are you sure? No. I go, this is really strong. No, no, no. I go, okay. I go, your grandfather won't let up on it. She goes, well, wait a second. My grandfather knew Walt Disney. They worked together, and Walt Disney offered him a job. I go, to work with him in Anaheim. She goes, oh, yeah. Why would he bring that up? And I go, whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's not worry so far why he would bring that up. Okay. I don't fling out Disneyland in California and Anaheim. I mean, how many people's grandfathers knew Walt Disney and were offered a job by him? But then it got better because she goes, well, he turned down the job. And the grandfather's wife, her grandmother, stepped in and said, because he would have been double crossed.
Oh,
So
that came through in the reading?
that came through in the reading. And and for anyone listening that's part of the Disney Corporation or Disney Company or all that, we have to be careful with that interpretation. The double cross could mean a lot of things. It could have mean that maybe they just wouldn't have worked out together, or something else could have happened. But the thing is, the grandfather turned down the job at Disney, and subsequently the family was always annoyed with him, like, oh, we could have been super rich, but it wasn't meant to be, and it would not have ever worked out properly. So spirit communication is, spirits are not here to scare us, frighten us, harm us, or control us. Nothing spiritual is controlling. I always pray God sent forth spirits for the highest of purposes to bring us messages of love, healing, and resolution. And in that context, the resolution was, hey, can everybody lighten up on the grandfather and his legacy? He actually did do the right thing by not accepting that job, way back when.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. Well, Mark, I want to be respectful of your time, and I'm so grateful that you're here. And you've given us little hints of things that you're working on and how you work with people. But can you spell out how people could find out more about the projects you're working on and to connect with you?
Certainly. Please visit my website, which is afterlifefrequency.com. Just like my latest book, The Afterlife Frequency, I invite you to sign up for my newsletter. You will also find out on my website about how to order my books and to schedule a private session. I do Light Circle online events. Light Circles are limited to 6 people each. I got a couple coming up usually every month. And that way everyone's guaranteed a reading. Also, tune into the Psychic and the Doc. That's my weekly live stream show on the Transformation Network, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, and all times either side. And my co-host is Dr. Pat Basili. She's a world-renowned behavioral psychologist. She's been the host of the Dr. Pat Show for over 20 years. And people call in, I'll do a reading, and she will use her amazing gifts to help people understand what the message means and its full healing power. You can find out about subscribing to Best Holistic Life magazine. I'm very honored to be one of their VIP executive contributors, and I write articles every month about spirituality and some of my adventures around the world, which are always kind of it's an honor for me to be able to share those. So please visit my website, afterlifefrequency.com. Cara, I want to thank you so much for having me on, and I look forward to returning.
Absolutely. It'd be my pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to this episode of Meditation Conversation. I'd be so grateful if you would share this episode with someone in your life who would appreciate it. You may not realize just how valuable your sharing is, as it helps to build momentum and make high vibrational content such as this more accessible and easier to find. I'd also be so grateful for you to subscribe to this content. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to the next meditation conversation.